In my ministry with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, I have been to, well, you know, one of those places that we often describe as a God-forsaken place? Now, God doesn't forsake literally any place, but that's the expression we use sometimes to describe a really deserted place. Well, West Texas falls in that category. This must have happened in West Texas decades ago. This was back when you could leave your kid outside the store, you could go into the store, and then you could come back out, pick up your kid, and go home. And it was safe. Well, a new preacher had moved into town. And he moved into town, and this was when he first arrived on the scene. He happened to stop at the grocery store because he needed to get something before he went into the house that the church had there for him to live in. And so he went to the store, and there was this boy who was just sitting outside of the grocery store, just piddling around. And the preacher knew that after he got the bread and the milk at the store, he needed next to go to the post office and mail something. And so he asked that boy, he said, hey, kid, where is the post office in this town? And the kid explained with great accuracy. Well, you just go down this way a little bit, and then you turn right, and then you turn left, and you'll be right there. You can't miss it. Well, the guy said, hey, kid, I'm the new preacher in town. I want you to come to church on Sunday. I want you to come, and I'll tell you how to get to heaven. And the little boy laughed and said, Mister, I ain't coming to your church and listening to your sermon. If you don't know where the post office is, how in the world are you going to tell me how to get to heaven and where that is? You know, we're good at asking questions, aren't we? And some questions are more important than others. A lot of times when we're growing up, we ask the question why, right? Why we got to do something, or why we can't do something. And when we're growing up, we're always wanting to know from our parents why. That seems to be instinctive, because even as we grow older, because of life, we will often ask the question why. And a lot of times we'll ask that question why whenever something bad happens. I've gotten to the point where I think in our culture, a lot of people think the question why is the $1 million question. Now, I know some of you will remember this show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? That show actually began in America in 1999. It's a UK, United Kingdom, British original TV series. It made its way across the Atlantic Ocean, and then it got its kickoff with, you probably remember if you were watching TV back then, Regis Philbin. He was the moderator of that show. I don't know about you, but I loved that show. It was really fascinating. And what you had to do, if you don't remember that show, or you never watched it, you started getting asked, if you were picked as a contestant, these simple questions. And then there were 15 questions that you needed to answer correctly. And all the questions were multiple choice. If you could answer all 15 questions, then the 15th question would be the $1 million question. And if you got that right, they would give you $1 million. And that happened. There were a number of times while that was running in the United States, sometimes also then moderated by other people other than Regis Philbin when he stepped aside. There were a number of people who won $1 million from that show because they were able to answer the $1 million question. So in our culture, when we talk about the $1 million question, we're talking about a question that's really a big deal. A question that really matters. A question that we think has great value. And I think it's just human curiosity sometimes that we will ask the question why. But it's not only out of human curiosity as we grow older. And we begin to experience some things, or know some people who have experienced some things that have been awful. Really bad things. Maybe tragic things. I'm talking about life-altering things. Maybe life-threatening things. And we can't help but be curious about the million-dollar question. It seems like what we passionately want to know is we want to know why. We want to know why. Stop and think about the why questions that we ask whenever bad stuff happens. Why me? Why her or why him? Why now? Why this? Why did this happen anyway? Boy, we can really become dominated in our thinking by this passionate desire to know the question why. Now, if we were to know the answer to the question why, the reality is we need to remember we still have to live with the circumstances that are prompting us to ask the question why. Even when you know the answer to the question why, you still have to deal with the difficulty in your life. So I'm beginning to question if this really is the million-dollar question. I want to ask you to turn to the book of Job if you have a Bible with you. Maybe your cell phone or maybe your iPad or maybe there's a Bible in the pew in front of you with the songbooks. But either way, if you happen to have access to a Bible, I want to ask you to and encourage you to turn to the book of Job so that you can see some of the things that I want to note with you before we make a couple of, I think, very important points about this question, why? Now, Job was no average Joe or Job. He was an exceptional man of God. As the book opens up in chapter 1, verse 1, he's described as a blameless, upright, one who feared God and shunned evil kind of person. It also mentions in verse 8 that the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant, Job?" I think that is one of the coolest things that could be said of anybody. I think that may be the crowning description of Job. There's a lot of wonderful, good things said about Job, but when God says about you, "My servant, Job," when he describes you that way, that indicates something about your spirit, your attitude, your relationship with him, and the life that you're living. He was no ordinary human being. The Lord said to Satan in verse 8, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. Have you considered this wonderful man of God who loves me, who worships me?" Satan, of course, did not look at Job that way, nor does Satan look at us that way if we are serving the Lord and striving to reflect God's holiness in our life either. The reality is, Job was an exceptional man of God. Now, if you know the story, you know that he hit on hard times. He had successive things happen to him in his life that were burdens that he was afflicted with. I want you to stop and try to think and even internalize what it may have been like if you were Job. Let's say, chapter 1, verse 2, you have 7 sons and 3 daughters, and you lost them all. You didn't just lose a child. You lost every single one of your 10 children. Imagine that. Imagine how that would affect Job and Mrs. Job. Verse 3 says in chapter 1, he had 7,000 sheep. That's a lot of stinking, by the way. 3,000 camels. That wouldn't require a lot of water, from what I understand about camels. 500 yoke of oxen. 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. And he lost all of that. He's lost all of his 10 children. He's lost all of his prosperity. He has gone from great prosperity to severe adversity, just like that. How in the world would you feel? What would be going on between your ears If you were Job and you had lost that significantly in your life, well, then later we read in the story that he lost his health. He not only lost his children and his prosperity, he lost his health. Verse 7 says in chapter 2, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took for himself a potsherd, that's a broken piece of pottery, with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of ashes. Misery. That was his life. It was a miserable existence. Now he's lost his health in addition to all of that. And it's the kind of loss of health that has these symptoms where it's a very painful experience in his life. What effect would that have on you? How would that impact your thinking and your feeling? How would that affect your spirit and your attitude? He had blow after blow that he had to suffer from, all from the hand of Satan. Job was struggling mightily in his life. When we are struggling mightily in our life, and something's going on that's really scary, maybe painful, heartbreaking, causing us a tremendous amount of grief because it's some kind of loss, we can be just like Job, and we can wonder why. There are so many why questions that we could ask. Job asked the question why. Chapter 3. Now remember, before I note his why questions, that this is an exceptional man of God. He is suffering now. Does it make any difference if you're an exceptional man or woman of God when you begin to suffer greatly in your life? Do you somehow become supernatural? Above the ability of a human? You're still a mere mortal male or female. And that was Job. He was a great man of God. Just because he was of God did not mean that he was above human. He was still human. So he, just like us, begins asking why. Chapter 2, verse 11. Or 3, I'm sorry. Chapter 3, verse 11. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me? Or why the breast that I should nurse? Why in the world was I ever born? To experience this, to live like this, why in the world would God permit that to happen? It'd be better not to be born than be born and experience this. Then later in chapter 3, verse 20. Why? Now here again is another why question. Why is light given to him who is in misery and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death? Who is longing for death here? He's not just talking about other people. He's expressing his personal feelings here. He's among those who are longing for death. He doesn't understand why he's been born in light of what he's living in those circumstances he was living in then. And now he's wondering, why in the world hasn't God let me die? It'd be better for me to be dead than be experiencing this. Can you blame him? Can you expect anything other than that kind of natural human response? Who long for death, chapter 3, verse 21, but it does not come. And search for it more than hidden treasures. That's passion to die. He had a passion to die. He wanted to die. Then drop down to verse 23 of chapter 3. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden and whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes before I eat, and my groanings pour out like water. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. Wow, you talk about a piece of poetry that has great power. You see, the book of Job is in the category of Hebrew poetry, ancient Hebrew poetry. This is a poetic story about a real man who lived in the same broken world we do, but long before we did. He was probably a patriarch, like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The reason I say that is he offered sacrifices as the patriarch of his family for the benefit of his family in chapter 1. It's very likely he wouldn't have done that if he was living under the law of Moses. You would do that through the priest. So here he is, a patriarch of old, a great man of God. He's now suffering tremendously, and it's having an effect on him. Let's not be naive, and let's be honest about who we really are and what life is really like to live in this broken world. Let's admit the fact that it has an effect on us, a powerful effect on us. You know what's going to happen if you cut yourself? You're going to bleed. That's a natural, normal, human experience from getting cut. And when you get cut, it's going to hurt. That's a natural response, experience of a human being in a broken world living in a tent, a temporary dwelling like our physical bodies. And when we're struggling with some difficulty in our life, let's not think that just because we're Christians, this is going to be a piece of cake. Or we're going to get over it in X amount of time. And we're going to be back to normal. Because you don't get back to normal. What you do is you have to create a new normal. When your life has been turned upside down by some enormously difficult burden that you're having to bear, it could be a health diagnosis of you, or one of your children, or your grandchildren. It could be the loss of the vast majority of your finances. Maybe you have started a business and you poured your heart and soul and finances into that business, and it's a family business. And something happens that it crashes and burns, and you've got to deal with that. Just like every other human being on planet Earth has to deal with financial disaster in their life. What if you've raised a child and you poured your heart and soul into the development of that child to help them to become Christian, but they choose not to become a Christian? Or what if they become a Christian, and after they become a Christian, you lose that child to the world? That child chooses the world and becomes of the world. Instead of being of God, they choose to be of the world. And you've got the heartbreak of the godly heart of godly parents who love their children and have had this loss that they're having to experience, and they have no control over it. They can't repair the situation. They can't make it better. It's between their child and God. Imagine a woman who's been raped. And she's lost her virginity. It's been stolen from her by this horrible, violent experience of rape. She's going to have to live with the effect of that. And the initial effect of that is she's going to be a wreck. She's going to be a mess. And she's going to be in trauma probably for years. She's going to need counseling for a long period of time. And she's going to have to live with that reality the rest of her life. She is a rape victim that has survived. You see how hard it is to live in this broken world and experience some of the things that we experience in this world? Job lived in a broken world too. And even Job, with all of his greatness and his godliness, look at how these things affected him. He was really struggling. Why in the world am I going through this? Now, I want to point out that it's not a sin to ask this question. And I think proof clear is Jesus hanging on the cross. Remember what he said? One of the 7 things he said is, why have you forsaken me? The sinless Son of God asked the question, why? Therefore, it's not a sin to ask the question, why? I can't help but wonder, why did God permit us to know that's what Jesus said on the cross? Why did God let us know he said that on the cross? And here is my opinion, and it's nothing but an opinion. And it may not be right. But I will say this. I can't help but wonder if God was giving us yet another bit of evidence that he was the Son of Man. He was human and divine simultaneously. 100% human, 100% divine. And when he said what he said on the cross, why have you forsaken me? That is so human. That is so Son of Man. He was the Son of God, but he was the God in the flesh. And there are many times in Scripture when we read the Gospels, we see the human Son of God. The Son of Man. He got thirsty. He got tired. He had to sleep too. He had anger. He struggled with the response of other people. He had emotions. And when he suffered on the cross, he suffered just like a regular human being would have suffered, going through the same thing. It's not a sin to ask the question, why? So I'm not suggesting to you that you ought to feel guilty if you ask the question why, because you've gone through something, or somebody you love has gone through something awful. I'm not suggesting it's wrong or sinful to ask that question. This is so true. H. Norman Wright has passed away. He was a faith-based fellow who was in the counseling field and has left many things behind in the way of books and articles on the internet about a lot of helpful things for personal struggles in life. And he said, and I think it's so true, one of the greatest feats of life is to learn to live without answers. It's 1989. And it's Thanksgiving weekend. I was a preacher in Hartville, Ohio for 33 years. And during that time, we would often travel down to Dover and New Philly. I consider that home for me because I graduated from New Philly High School. Our parents and our grandparents, my parents, my wife's parents, my children's grandparents, one lived in Dover, one lived in New Philly. So typically on holiday weekends, we would go down there. And so in 1989, we went down there, and we had a nice visit that Thanksgiving weekend. It was Saturday night, and we were driving back. We were driving back Route 43, and we were heading north. We were about 3 miles away from home. There was a Mennonite church building in Hartville that was hosting a wedding and a wedding reception that Saturday night. There was a couple that was attending that particular Mennonite wedding, and they were from Youngstown, Ohio. He was a retired preacher. His name was Burford, Mr. Burford. And he and his wife had left the reception that night, and they started heading east on a state route that crossed Route 43. And we were headed north in our 1985 Pontiac Bonneville. And they were headed east, and he missed the stop sign. And his powder blue Ford Pinto was right smack dab in the middle of that intersection, just like the blink of an eye. To my left, as we were driving north, There were physical structures, there were buildings there that blocked my view of the traffic coming from my left going to my right. And it's in the dark. And all of a sudden, this powder blue Ford Pinto appears in that intersection. I'm going 45 miles an hour, and I hit the side door of that powder blue Ford Pinto. And Eileen Burford died that night at Alliance Community Hospital. Why did we leave Dover and New Philly when we did? If we had left at a different time, that may have never happened. We wouldn't have been at the same intersection at the same time. If I'd gotten one more red light instead of a green light, that would have never happened. We would have never been at that intersection at the same time. Why did it have to be me driving our car be the ones that met their car on that intersection, that after our wreck finally got a traffic light for the first time? You can't help but ask why questions when bad things happen. Learning to live without answers is a great feat. And there's one way that I know that we can do that, and it's by faith. Old Brother Charles Hodge, that I mentioned on an earlier occasion this morning in Bible class, you know, the fellow who often said, familiar scriptures ought to be read more carefully, also wrote this in an editorial on the back page of the Gospel Advocate many years ago. He said, faith does not give us the answers. Faith allows us to live without answers. I don't need to know the answers to the why questions I have about that accident. Nor do I need to know why my wife at such an early age, about 52 years old, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I don't need to know why she only lived a little over 8 years after that diagnosis, which is an extremely brief period of time for a Parkinson's patient. And why in the world did she die because of Parkinson's, not just with Parkinson's? When the vast majority of people who are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease do not die of Parkinson's. It's a life-altering disease. It's not a life-threatening disease, but it was both for her. That Parkinson's disease came up into her lungs and she just quit breathing, and the doctor predicted it 5 months before it happened. I don't need to know the answer to those questions. I do have those questions. But I've learned by patiently waiting on the Lord that I don't need to know the question why. I don't know why and don't intend to. You know that song we sing about after? We'll know all about it. I don't know. I just can't sing that phrase. Because I don't know that that's true. Except that the one thing I'll know is that I didn't need to know. But I've already figured that out this side of eternity. But the reality is that why question sure will bug you. But what's really complicated about this is there's a whole lot of other questions that we ask that really complicate our struggle with difficult things, especially the losses that we experience. We have where questions, we have what questions, we have when questions, we have how questions. But let me suggest to you, why is not the $1 million question. The $1 million question is who. Here's the question that is most beneficial to us when we're struggling with our difficulties in our life. And when we are pained to the point that it's hard to breathe because of the losses we've experienced in our life. When we feel like it's not worth it trying to get up out of bed. There's no reason for us to shave anymore. Why should I even get dressed anymore? And frankly, I don't know why God let me be born. And frankly, I don't want to live anymore. There is a question that's the $1 million question that can help you more than any other question And you know the answer to every one of the who questions. Let me give you some. Who knows exactly what you've gone through, or are going through, or will go through? Who knows that? In the sermon this morning, we read the first part of Psalm 139. He knows when you sit down, when you rise up. He knows all the things about you. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 13 says there's no creature hidden from him. As a matter of fact, in Acts 1 and verse 24, the Bible says he knows the hearts of all men. So, who knows what's going on in your life? And who knows what's going on inside of you because of what's going on around you? You know the answer to those questions. Who cares about you more than anybody else when you are really struggling in your life? You know the answer to that question. It's the same one who became flesh for you, lived some 3 years for you, was rejected, put on a cross, and crucified, raised from the dead, and now sits at the right hand of God. We know the answer to that question. Every who question you want to ask, the answer is God. And the key to coping with the awful things that we're experiencing in our life, the key question is not why. That's not even close to the $1 million question. The $1 million question is who. And who loves us more than anybody else. And who can provide for us better than anybody else. Our Father who is in heaven. Were you touched by that passage this morning in the sermon? If you were not, I want to bring it again to your attention. Frankly, I don't know how many times I read this psalm. And this verse never struck me, never dawned on me how significant it is about God knowing about us and caring about us. It's Psalm 56. It's verse 8, and this is David. He's a mess because of what he's struggling with. He says, you've kept, and he's talking to God here, you have kept count of my tossings. He knows when you're restless. When you're wandering around and you're struggling with a foggy brain, maybe because you're on chemo treatments or maybe because you're suffering from grief. That's a natural human struggle and reaction. When we have suffered and are struggling with something difficult, we have a hard time thinking straight. He says, you keep count of my tossings. He knows about every tossing and every turning in our life. And then this is the part that I really just love even more. And you put my tears in your bottle. You put my tears in your bottle? The heartache that causes me to cry, to tear up, and sometimes weep and wail in my life. God puts those tears in his bottle. That is a Hebrew poetic way of talking about how much God cares about you when you are really struggling in your life. He cares about you more than you care about yourself. What an awesome thing for Almighty God, the sovereign King of the universe, knowing about everything going on in your life, the effect it's having on you, and how much he cares about you, and how he can provide for everything that you need while you're struggling in that storm in your life. And he's the answer to the question. Every one of the questions that are who questions. There is your $1 million question. So what we need to do is we need to learn to wait on the Lord. Keep leaning on him hard, because he's going to strengthen our heart when we are really troubled by the things that we're experiencing in our life. And never be so naive as to doubt the power of negative circumstances in your life. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and walk and not faint. Who can help you more than anybody else? It's our Father in heaven. There is nothing that you and he cannot handle this side of eternity. His presence in your life while you're going through a stormy time in your life, is your greatest need. And He is the who that we need to lean hard on when we're wondering why. This morning, we asked if there was anybody who was needing comfort, strength, hope, and the prayers of this church. So we asked that question again. If you're struggling with something in your life right now and you would like to, especially, specifically, publicly, make known to the church here what a struggle you're having in your life right now, let me encourage you to respond to the invitation and let us know how we can help you. And if you're not a Christian, the burden of sin is the greatest issue that we have, the greatest problem that we have, and that can all be addressed because that's why Jesus died for us. So if you need to be baptized into the benefits of Jesus' death and resurrected to walk a new life, we want you to come. That's the reason why we're going to sing this song. Let's stand while we sing.